Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Unraveling Rare. My name is Elaine Pitsinyaga, and I'm so excited to announce that with us today we have Neal Muni, who is a man of many hats, but also the Chief Medical Officer at Unravel Biosciences. Now, Neal, your career has mimicked all stages of drug development, starting from clinical need to drug discovery and development, getting approval from the FDA, and then moving back into patient practice. So I would ask you if you could share your extraordinary background with us, and then if you could also highlight some of the main challenges that you observed in each one of these stages.
Happy to do that. Thank you for having me. As you mentioned, I last 25 years or so have worn a lot of hats in the life sciences space. The one thread through all of that has stayed the same is that I've continued to practice medicine as an internist, inpatient hospital medicine, which I started again about 25 years ago, trained here in Boston at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, Harvard Medical School, and have continued that, albeit in more of a part-time capacity. But early in my career, I went to the FDA, was a medical officer. I then did some time in healthcare investment banking, spent some time in roles in industry. Was actually the founder and CEO of my own startup, which we sold after we got our first drug approved. And now, kind of coming full circle, spend a lot more of my time teaching, mentoring. I have continued to serve as a faculty advisor at the Wyss Institute, where I actually had a chance to meet Richard and Fred and hear about the Unravel story. But in terms of all of these, so whether it be as a treating clinician, as a regulator, being on the industry side, or being more on the investor side, in terms of that, kind of have a good sense of all of the aspects of it. And I think the one common thread, the industry, drug industry, and that's gone through a lot of changes over the last 20 to 30 years. But I think the one common thread in that remains critically important is to focus on unmet needs, focus on meeting needs that patients truly have. There are companies or focus that gets more onto the side of just creating technology and creating something that seems really exciting and it just gets a lot of people excited just based on the pure science. And that's great. But I think the challenge, and it's always been there and will always continue to be there, is to always think of that unmet need and think of the patient and clinical application in mind. Because one can have great science, one can have a great idea, but if there's no clear applicability in terms of how that will help a patient improve their life and is meaningful to them, the best technology, regardless of the best people, the best funding, whatever have you, will just not be successful.
So, right now, what do you think is the biggest challenge in traditional drug development?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of challenges. How we as a healthcare system can afford to pay for exciting technologies, but I'll leave that part aside. I'll think more on the drug development bit in terms of challenges. I think we've made incredible progress in the last 20 to 30 years in terms of better understanding some of the underlying mysteries behind disease mechanisms, what causes disease, and creating incredible advances in terms of therapeutics that are more selective, more targeted, better safety profiles, better efficacy. So I think one of the challenges really that persists, despite the fact that we are getting better in many different ways in developing better therapies, is in that translational early piece as to crossing that chasm from something that looks great, maybe on the lab bench, looks great, maybe even in some preclinical or animal testing, but then when put into patients who actually have the disease that we're trying to treat, it just does not work as predicted. Now, there are some disease states and cases where we've gotten much better at that, but there are a lot of disease states, for example, orphan diseases, neurologic diseases. There are cases there where our translational models and predictions are still not that good for a lot of different conditions. And so that remains a big bottleneck for us in terms of we have potentially promising therapeutics that, frankly speaking, we don't quite know how to really assess it with good predictive success before we subject patients to them. And that remains a challenge. I think slowly but surely we're chipping away at that, but there's a lot that remains to be learned.
And speaking of translation, I would be curious to also hear what, in your opinion, are the advantages of, Unravel's drug discovery platform using biological networks, patient data, and also using existing molecules to validate new targets. And you also mentioned, your involvement with the Weiss Institute. So I was also curious if you could give us a little bit more background about how you actually got involved with Unravel Biosciences.
Yeah, sure, sure. So I'll start with that because that kind of ties into how I got to know about the Unravel platform and what really got me excited about it. So I've been a faculty mentor at the Weiss now for 5 years, and related to Harvard Medical School. So I've sort of been in that ecosystem now, I guess, for about 25 years, but formally got involved just in the past few years. And for me, just a very exciting chance for me to get a landscape of just incredible cutting edge technologies, incredibly driven scientists and entrepreneurs that want to take it to a practical application. That's a big mantra and really a focus of the Weiss is the technology is not helpful if you can't get it out of the lab and into patients and actually solve a real life human problem. And so it's through being at the Weiss where I think early on, maybe about 4 or so, maybe even 5 years ago, was introduced to Richard and Fred and learned about the model and really the underlying platform that they were trying to build based on, in this case, again, RNA and really focusing on that side of the piece, using RNA mapping and networks. And again, I am not a basic scientist, and so I can only know one tiny iota of the true underlying science. I'm kind of more from the clinical and the operational industry side. But having said that, it was very intuitive to me when I heard Richard and Fred talk about the underlying basis of the platform, the science behind the platform. And the reason why, for me, I feel that it's very compelling, and I'm very optimistic about what it's capable of doing, is that for the longest time, we in the industry and in science, in terms of drug discovery, have sort of focused ourselves on this idea that every disease has a single pinpoint underlying mechanistic basis, some molecular derangement, whatever have you, genetic or protein. And there's a sort of magic target that if you find a magic bullet that addresses the magic target, you're going to cure the disease. Now, there are cases that's true. There are a few cases where we know the pathophysiology really well, and if you correct one single thing, you're fine. That's great. There are a lot of conditions, unfortunately, that things are not that clean and probably will never be that clean for the very reason is that biology is messy. Biology conserves existing networks. That's sort of how we've all evolved as organisms. We repeat the use. We use the similar things, receptors, targets, cytokines, whatever have you. And it's integrated in biological circuits to do many different things in many different ways. And so the truth of the matter is that for the majority of disease states and the majority of biologic conditions, it's never as simple as a single pinpoint target, and a pinpoint drug will hit that. What the Unravel platform does is it's a disease agnostic or mechanism agnostic way of looking at the whole integration of a patient's overall RNA profile, really taking it from a transcriptomic perspective, looking at a healthy state of how it's a little bit like a roadmap. You just kind of look at it and see how things are, and then deciding what types of drugs would best restore a condition to that normal state if it's been affected by a specific condition. So you look at a patient that may have a specific either genetic or other disorder or disease, look at that RNA map, look at what's awry compared to that of a healthy, and then match it up to drugs that have been characterized in the database that they've used, over 40,000 different molecules, to predict which are the ones that most likely will restore that normal map. Now, the nice thing about that is it takes into account biology is integrated. It's messy. It's the net sum of the impact of what that drug will do ultimately, which could be many different things, that leads to a result. And that's what Unravel's platform is predicting. So I think In my mind, that's very compelling, and it's very intuitive if one thinks about truly how biology works, and how normal biology works, diseased biology works, and all the integration of all these things coming together at the end. And I think in terms of using repurposed drugs, whether they be tool drugs or drugs in their own right to find new ways to use it, there's a very high attraction of that because all of us want to make an impact. We want to benefit patients and we want to do something. And many of these patients, frankly, don't have much time. Many have life or death conditions and they're looking for something now or in the short term. Traditional drug discovery from soup to nuts can take decades. The basic biology, come up with a molecule and do that. If there are drugs that are already out there, that are already characterized in terms of safety, albeit maybe used for something else, but it's already made and it's available, and we can identify a novel use of that drug in a condition that so far has eluded all of us for finding a treatment, it's one of the fastest paths to making an impact for that patient or that disease state or condition. And so I think that becomes highly attractive, not to mention the costs for development in that circumstance are far lower than if one truly were starting de novo from soup to nuts. Now, was that going to happen all the time? Probably not. There's going to be a lot of cases where there may be a drug that does something, but it's not perfect. It may have a toxicity or a dosing profile that needs to be optimized. But that's where Unravel as a drug company or other drug companies can use the learnings from that repurposed compound using this platform and come up with the optimal structure to continue to improve on whatever it is that needs to be improved.
And speaking of impact, I was just curious to hear what your thoughts on are any potential advances in science and technology that could really significantly make an impact in accelerating treatments for diseases, but specifically rare disease in general, because right now that's where a lot of need is required.
Yeah, no, I think the trends we are headed into very exciting times because I think a couple of things. One, as mentioned before, our understanding of basic mechanistic biology, whether they be the interplay of genetics and proteomics, is increasing exponentially. We have now advanced tools such as AI to wade through massive amounts of data to assist us in terms of coming up with better predictions or better targeting of understanding this. I think another thing that really is critical, and we've seen this in the last 20 to 30 years, is that patient advocacy groups are becoming more active, more involved, more mobilized, especially for ultra rare diseases where there may not be a large population, there may not be outside stakeholders who can advocate for them, like the caregivers or patients or families of those that are afflicted with a specific condition. Not only advocating, which is critically important in providing support, but also in cases providing financial support, where families band together, organizations band together, and fund basic research for some of these conditions, where that allows industry, academics, the scientific community as a large to better study and understand these diseases. That is a trend that's picked up. I hope it continues and continues to augment. But in my mind, patients and those that are family members of patients, caregivers, are a critical stakeholder in this ecosystem.
In this day and age, we hear the word AI everywhere. I was just thinking about how much of the AI applications are like actual real advancements or whether it's just hype or not. So I was just wondering like what your thoughts are on like the hype versus the reality of using AI in biotechnology.
Sure. And so I think I look at its application to biotechnology as just the general how AI has been received overall in these last few years. That yes, is there hype? Absolutely. I mean, I think that anything that has an AI label on it, all of a sudden people start getting excited. Having said that, I absolutely think that one, AI is here to stay, of course, in more advanced forms over time. And it is going to be more and more critical to us as it's almost like a research companion. I think the nuances, especially maybe in our space of medicine and life sciences, as opposed to maybe other uses for AI, is at this stage, we're still in very early emerging stages of using AI. At the end of the day, learn language models, massive machine learning algorithms are only as good as what you put into it. And so, unlike many other things that are not life science related, as mentioned before, since our understanding of basic biology in some of these conditions still is very rudimentary, the old garbage in, garbage out hypothesis that if you're training an AI algorithm or you're programming based on data that is either inadequate or wrong or just doesn't have a full sense of a disease state, you're not going to get much out of it. So I think the way I look at it is, yeah, is there a lot of hype these days? That there is, but I absolutely think that it is an incredibly valuable tool. It's going to continue to become more useful to us for its application for us in medicine, rare disease, and discovery and biology. I just think we need to continue to generate quality data in terms of the mechanistic basis of disease, the linkage between, again, genomics, proteomics, and how these all interplay and interact, such that then AI can be trained on and learn from that massive amount of basic data to take our understanding to that next level. And then it'll be an incredibly powerful tool for us in drug discovery.
That said, and then given again your extensive background in all stages of drug discovery and development, I was just wondering what your vision is for making drug discovery and that whole process a win-win situation for both the patients and the biotechs involved.
Well, I think one way, and I think slowly we're starting to evolve this way, and this is not just industry, this applies to myself as a physician or we as a community, how we think about diseases. They're all, for, I don't know if I'd go so far as to say the majority of conditions, but certainly a very large number of conditions and diseases that we treat, there really isn't a one size fits all. There never has been. There may be a treatment that's good enough that works, generally speaking, in a large enough population. All of us are very different, and how all of us react to a specific drug for a given disease state, how our experience is with a specific condition or disease is very different. And it integrates not only the underlying, let's say, if there's a genetic basis or exposure basis that has created a disease, it's that patient's environment, it's that patient's diet, it's the patient's age. All of those make each and every one of us incredibly unique. And so where I see the win-win, and I'm encouraged to see this, is with greater advocacy of patients, with greater tools and the ability now for us to really take more precision medicine. I mean, everyone's spoken about precision medicine, but up until recently, now we're able to start doing things that are more patient-driven, individual-driven, that everyone is different and their experience is different. If we as a clinical community, but also we as a regulatory, so I put my FDA hat on as well, we all need to think about the drug development paradigm a little bit differently than I think conventionally how we've used to. It's like somebody has diabetes, schizophrenia, depression. It's a one size fits all. There's a drug that just treats the condition. That's not really true. Everyone's different and their experience is different with the disease and how they react to drugs. We should be looking at people much more with a fine, sort of a fine tooth comb as to different phenotypes, different characteristics that allow more precisely targeted therapies that work for them and their experience with the disease. So my hope is that and it takes all of us working together, industry, clinicians, scientists, and regulators, to think about diseases like this and make sure that the individual variability between patients is fully factored in. The win-win there is patients ultimately get a therapy that's more directed to them, that with their experience with the disease and more likely to treat their condition and have that better. Drug companies have a higher likelihood of success if they can more accurately predict who will be a responder, who won't be a responder for a given drug. And regulators, at the end of the day, they have a tough job. They want to assure the safety and effectiveness of drugs. And so, if you have more precise ways to identify populations in which a given drug will be safer and more effective, at the end of the day, that also makes their mission also easier too. And it's using science to drive to these decisions.
Thank you so much for bringing all those valuable points forward. And I would also like to thank you so much for participating in the episode. It's been such a pleasure having you. Now, I don't know if you want to close off with any thoughts.
No, thank you so much for inviting me. I've enjoyed the conversation. But I think the way I'd close it is an incredibly exciting time to be not only in the medical field, but in the drug discovery field, in the field of life science, where I truly feel that things are starting to come together, where science is great, the ability to interpret science is great, where we really can continue making a great beneficial impact to all of us, patients. At the end of the day, we're all going to have something, some more serious than others. But to the extent that we can treat each other and be able to find treatments for everyone that's afflicted by a certain condition, I definitely feel that science is on our sides, and we have great people working very dedicated in this industry to help us achieve those goals.